Good evening. Welcome to Maryland Institute College of Arts Constitution Day 2020, Justice and the Vote. As a note to all attendees, this event is being recorded and we will be captioning, so you're able to turn on your captions. I am happy to be with you tonight, and my name is Abby Ninehouse. I am the director of the Center for Creative Citizenship at MICA. The Center for Creative Citizenship is part of MICA's long-term strategic plan to integrate civic learning and action, as well as democratic engagement throughout the institution. We support the development of partnerships, programs, and initiatives that advance the interests of Baltimore's communities and neighborhoods while contributing to the educational experience of members of the MICA community. We are also very proud to be leading our MICA Votes Initiative, which is a cross-campus collaboration to make sure that voting and civic engagement is a part of everything that we do and is fun and easy for all of our students, faculty, and staff. I'm happy to join you as tonight's host as we reflect on the Constitution of the United States turning 233 years old today. Tonight, our panelists will explore and assert the centrality of Black politics in American legal and justice system transformations of the United States through the 19th century, drawing a connecting thread to the present-day grassroots mobilization of Black women and families, continuing these structural transformations through advocacy amplified by collective voting power. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Enoch Pratt Free Library, and I would like to introduce you to our partner, Tracy Diamond. Tracy Diamond is the Adult Service Coordinator at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. This includes managing and hosting the prestigious Writers Live series, which brings the latest thinkers and authors to Baltimore. Tracy previously worked as programming assistant and social media manager for the library. Before coming to the Pratt, she taught composition at the University of Baltimore and Baltimore County Community College. A writer and organizer in the Baltimore writing community, she has a master's in fine arts in creative writing and publishing arts from the University of Baltimore, as well as a bachelor's of arts in communication and history from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. I'd like to welcome Tracy.
Thank you so much, Abby. I didn't know my full bio was going to be read. So good evening, everyone. As Abby said, I'm Tracy Diamond, Adult Services Coordinator at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. And I wanted to say that the Pratt Library is honored to be a partner in hosting Constitution Day. MICA is redefining what it means to be an artist and part of a community. It's been a joy to work with MICA in person pre-pandemic and to continue to partner as we are hosting events virtually, like tonight's event, Justice and the Vote. The Pratt Library is dedicated to access. 14 branch libraries around the city have sidewalk service and mobile printing available. You can check out all sorts of materials, from books like you'd expect and mobile hotspots. We have virtual events to stay engaged with cultural leaders, like the partnership tonight, and on September 30th, we're hosting a conversation with Karamo Brown. We're also hosting information sessions to aid in understanding the voting process this year with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and the League of Women Voters of Baltimore City. You can learn more at prattlibrary.org. So thank you again to MICA, Furman, and everyone making tonight a powerful evening. I'm so thrilled to hear tonight's panel, so I'm sending it back to Abby Ninehouse.
Thank you, Tracy, and the Enoch Pratt Free Library for helping to make tonight's event possible. I would like to introduce our three esteemed panelists for tonight's event. First, we will hear from Professor Christopher Bonner. Christopher Bonner specializes in African American history and the 19th century United States. He published his first book, Remaking the Republic, Black Politics and the Creation of American Citizenship, in March 2020 with the University of Pennsylvania Press. This book centers free Black Americans and the legal transformations of the United States during the mid-19th century. Black people from across the antebellum free states use citizenship in their public demands for rights and protections, and their political work helps spur and shape the development of citizen status. African Americans protest helped to make citizenship a legal status that connected individuals to the federal government through a bundle of rights and obligations. This book links antebellum Black politics to Reconstruction era constitutional developments and considers the way Black people grappled with the limits of formal legal change. Professor Bonner is currently at work on a project considering how enslaved people navigated commercial networks as they sought to purchase freedom in the early 19th century. Next, I would like to introduce Nykidra Robinson. Nyki Robinson is an outreach specialist with over 13 years of project management, community engagement, and organizing experience. Often labeled as a millennial on the move, Nyki's life and work experience combined with her interest in politics was birthing ground for the delivery of her biggest project yet, Black Girls Vote Incorporated. This nonpartisan grassroots organization is focused on encouraging and mobilizing African-American women to use their collective voting power to advocate for issues that impact African-American women and families. Nyki was admitted into the 50th anniversary class of the National Urban Fellows Program, where she earned her Master's of Public Administration from Baruch College in New York City in 2019. Nyki enjoys planning events, traveling, bicycling, listening to music, learning, and connecting great people. And finally, we will hear from Imani Haynes, a curator, educator, and historian. Creator of the Million Women March exhibition, a retrospective celebration of the organizing efforts and missions of the seminal 1997 March for Black Women held in Philadelphia. The mobile exhibition aims to create a living platform for the March's legacy by continuing to advance intersectional empowerment for generations to come. She's a 2020 MFA in Curatorial Practice graduate from MICA, a recipient of the 2020 Waya Hoy Memorial Award, and the new Education Program Manager at the Josiah Henson Museum and Park in Rockville, Maryland. For tonight's event, we will hear from each of our panelists and then open the discussion to Q&A. If you would like to ask questions of the panelists, we ask that you utilize the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll ask as many questions as time permits. I'm very excited to be able to be a part of this panel tonight, and I hope you're also excited to hear from these three amazing individuals. So without further ado, I would like to turn the conversation to Professor Christopher Bonner.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you to everyone at MICA for having me, and thanks for putting this together. So I'm going to share my screen now. All right. So commemorating the signing of the US Constitution has to be about recognizing the insufficiencies of that document as it was written, and also about reflecting on the work that people have done to move the country toward real freedom, real equality, real justice. Tonight, I'm going to tell a story from my recent book, Remaking the Republic. It's a story about one Black man and the work he did to secure the vote. In his adolescent years, Willis Augustus Hodges must have spent many evenings with a sense of foreboding, worried about the violence that might be visited upon his family once he fell asleep. Hodges was born to free African-American parents in 1815 in Princess Anne County, Virginia, near the state's Atlantic coast and just above the North Carolina border. In the late 1820s and early 1830s, free Black people in the area endured waves of violent attacks by white bandits who invaded homes, assaulted people, and shot livestock. Willis Hodges later reflected on this campaign of terror. No free person of color within their reach was safe in person or property, he wrote, for these wolves had tasted human blood and liked it too well to let it alone. Hodges' parents owned about 200 acres of land and they insisted on remaining in Virginia. But Willis looked elsewhere in search of a home. He moved to New York, and over the next 2 decades, he organized protest meetings, participated in political conventions, and then moved upstate, where he was elected to local office. The terror inflicted on families like the Hodges in Virginia was intended to make real a vision of the United States as a white man's republic. Hodges spent the next decades contesting that vision of his native country and working to change the legal terms of his life. Hodges' story reflects Black American struggles to enrich their freedom in the early United States. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, several northern states passed laws that gradually abolished slavery. But at the same time, lawmakers in those states limited Black freedom in profound ways. And for example of this, after 1821, Black men in New York could only vote if they owned $250 worth of real estate, which is about $10,000 in today's money. When he arrived in that state in 1833, Willis Hodges was immediately disappointed at the state of Black freedom in the North. He was surprised to learn that most Black New Yorkers struggled to support themselves with work as waiters, cooks, and dock workers. He quickly realized that the law that restricted Black voting rights reflected the broader prejudice that constrained Black freedom in the state. Eventually, Hodges was fortunate to find stable work, and within a few years, he had saved enough money to open a small grocery store, which he ran with one of his brothers who had left Virginia and joined him in the North. As Hodges came to understand the legal and economic disabilities under which Black New Yorkers lived, he took steps to try to improve the terms of Black freedom in the state. He immersed himself in the culture of Black protest. In 1840, he represented Black residents of Brooklyn at a state convention held in Albany. The Black conventions were they were meetings that took place across the North beginning in the 1830s. People got together and they talked together about the problems they faced, and they tried to agree on solutions and on public statements that they could make to advocate for change. Hodges and other delegates at the 1840 convention delivered a sharp critique of the property requirement for Black voting. They called it a violation of justice because it deprived us of those rights which should have been enjoyed in common by all native-born citizens. Hodges also attended a Black convention in 1841, and there he began outlining an emerging set of ideas about a different Black future. He urged Black people to adopt an agrarian lifestyle. He reasoned that if Black New Yorkers moved upstate, and if they acquired cheap land of their own, they would be freed from the economic struggles of the cities, and they would have access to a variety of new opportunities. Hodges and a growing number of other Black Northerners believed that by moving west and helping to develop new communities, Black people might influence local laws and move segments of the country toward racial equality. In 1847, Hodges helped organize the New York Emigration Association, a group planning to establish a Black settlement upstate. He said that he was convinced that something besides speechifying had to be done if we wanted our rights. After a series of meetings of the Emigration Association, he joined with 8 other Black families, left Brooklyn, and settled on 40 acres in the Adirondacks in 1848. These Black folks made their homes on land provided by the wealthy white abolitionist Gerrit Smith. Smith offered 3,000 Black New Yorkers land upstate, hoping that his land grants would make it possible for more African-American men to vote. And he hoped that these communities might change white people's minds about the morality of slavery. Any Black person between the ages of 21 and 60 who did not already own land, and importantly to Smith, was not a drunkard, would be eligible for a 40 to 60 acre plot. Smith expressed serious concerns about drinking among Black New Yorkers. I am grieved to learn that intemperance has made such havoc among the colored people of the state, he wrote. Vain and worse than vain will be my grant of land to a drunkard. Recruiters seeking settlers to the Smith lands lied to their readers. The grant to you is free, untrammeled, unconditional, they wrote. This grant, of course, was not at all unconditional. Gerrit Smith was looking for a particular type of settler. His approach implied that the right to vote should be available only to Black people who followed a specific, narrow moral path. Willis Hodges apparently fit the bill. He made his home in Franklin County, and while he lived there, he was elected to the position of town collector. I'm not exactly sure what his role was in that position, but it's a really incredible turn in his story. Winning this election offered Hodges a direct form of government engagement, and it affirmed his legal position in the state and the nation. Settling on the Smith lands allowed him to secure that position. Hodges' story is a striking reflection of Black politics in action during the 19th century. He embodied important ideas about the significance of formal political power and about the avenues Black people should travel to attain it. In Franklin County, Hodges rejected the idea that the United States was a country intended to be ruled by white men. But while Hodges illuminates the legal possibilities of Black life in the 19th century, it's important to keep in mind how limited his experience was. He was born, I should really say how rare his experience was. He was born to free parents who were able to give him a basic education. That was quite rare in the South. He also had enough disposable income to relocate to New York, and then once he got there, to move again upstate in pursuit of political influence. It was those rare opportunities that made it possible for Hodges to gain the formal political power that Black activists had so long tried to secure. So when we see the story in this light, we can see that what Hodges won was at best a contingent citizenship. The status he pursued and what he gained in Franklin County was not available equally to African Americans. Black people made arguments about the terms of citizenship, and they struggled to secure rights, but their arguments were often responses to the restrictive terms that conferred rights on a narrow set of white men. Jumping the high hurdle that the state erected on the path to Black voting did not confront or challenge the racial inequality at the heart of the law. Instead, when Hodges moved to the Adirondacks and renounced all intoxicating drinks, he assumed the burden of his Blackness. He urged other African Americans to do the same, calling on them to navigate the world under the legal weight of racism. And so Hodges' life underlines some of the critical differences between legal protection and liberation. As we explore the ways Black politics has transformed American democracy, I think it's important to keep in mind some of the limits of those transformations. Opportunities for African Americans to secure the vote increased in the Civil War era. During and after the war, Black men insisted that their military service entitled them to the vote. They had risked their lives to kill rebel Southerners and to defend the Union, and so they must be seen as deserving of equal political rights. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, said that race, color, or previous condition of servitude could not be used to deny a citizen the right to vote. But the amendment's limits were made clear in Colfax, Louisiana in 1873. After a contested election for governor, dozens of white supremacists massacred a group of Black voters, killing more than 100 Black men. Many of these men appear to have been murdered after they tried to surrender. One man who observed the aftermath said that the bodies bore unusual marks of violence, different than what one would see on a normal battlefield. No one was punished for this massacre, and the horror of it has been obscured in public markers like this. White supremacists across the South used similar tactics to suppress Black voting for decades afterward. The story of Black people struggling for suffrage has to acknowledge that historically, the formal right to vote has been at best a partial solution to the problem of inequality. Given this history, I try to be empathetic toward Black people who have doubts about the significance of their vote. To me, it feels a little unfair to criticize Black folks for not voting, particularly when the barriers to the ballot box are so high and when the prospects for real racial justice stemming from an election often feel so low. The vote is not and has never been a perfect political tool. But with that said, our votes are critical. Willis Hodges' story reflects the intensity with which Black people have pursued the vote across US history and the potential they saw in that one political tool. In 1866, a group of Black New Yorkers said this: "To every man, the ballot is his protection from oppression and wrong, and his shield from the contempt of his fellow men." Perhaps this is what our vote is at heart: a shield, a way to defend ourselves against the most harmful manifestations of oppression. On its own, this is not enough to secure justice, but it's also not a tool to be discarded or neglected. Our vote is one kind of power among many that we should cultivate. Voting offers a chance to be heard in some of the spaces where white supremacy and economic inequality and so many other injustices have been constructed. Perhaps with our voices in those spaces, those injustices might begin to be dismantled. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Christopher Bonner. I really enjoyed reading your book and learned so much from reading it, and also just made me so mad once again that so much of American history we are not taught. And thank you. I look forward to furthering the discussion after we hear from our next two panelists.
Thank you.
So I'd like to now turn the conversation over to Nykidra Robinson of Black Girls Vote.
Thank you so much, Abby. So good evening, everyone. I'm so excited and so honored to be here. First and foremost, I want to thank Micah. Thank you so much for extending the invitation. I have on my Black Girls Vote shirt that was designed by Globe Collection and Press and Micah and Allison Fisher. So there's such a connection there. And so I'm just, again, excited to be here and just talk about my story. I know we heard the story of William Hodges, but I was asked to tell my story and how I got involved and mobilizing voters. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So before I talk about my story, one of the things that I think is so critical, when I look at this picture, you know, oftentimes we find pictures on the internet and we see things. However, we often don't study the signs, right? And so as I was looking at the signs and here, and you know, this picture stood out to me. It said, let our parents register, right? Let our parents vote. We need free elections. And again, this wasn't but so long ago. So as I sit here and I stand here and I'm out, you know, trying to mobilize voters and get folks involved, you know, it's always important for us to understand that we stand on their shoulders. And these are giants of the civil rights movement, people that we may never know their names, may have never heard their stories, but they too are important. All right, and so the Black vote, right? And so Professor Bonner touched on some of this earlier, but you know, I just like to, you know, just share, as we know, the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, granting Blacks the right to vote. However, it did not include Black women. Later on, as we talked about the women's suffrage, and again, we know that we are celebrating 100 years of the women's suffrage. However, oftentimes Black women are left out of that story and the sacrifices that Black women made. So whether it was Sojourner Truth, who gave her infamous speech in 1851 at the Women's Rights Conference, and where she talked of ain't I a woman, and ain't I a woman meaning that, you know, aren't I a woman? You know, I'm standing beside you. I'm here fighting for rights for all women. So, you know, other women often didn't necessarily fight for Black rights as much as we thought and had hoped they would. And so Black women, sometimes you find that the history of Black women, well as Ida B. Wells, who had her own newspaper and wrote stories, Mary Church Terrell, the first Black woman to get a college degree. Again, these are women who made the sacrifice about voting. And again, 100 years later, we still often hear about Elizabeth Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, but not as much about the Black women who stood there. Me, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And one of our first acts of service in 1913 was marching in the Women's Suffrage March. And taking part of that, you'll hear that they wanted Black women to be in the rear of the march. But Black women said no. They went and said, we'll march with our states. But those are some of the things that Black women have to do and stand up for their voices to be heard and let folks know that they are present. All right, again, the Civil Rights Movement, we know about the Civil Rights Movement that was Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964. And some would say that was the most important piece of legislation for Blacks. And again, the Voting Rights Act as well, the most important piece of legislation. And that was a time that LBJ, he pushed those landmark civil rights movement outlawing segregation in public places. And it was so critical for us as Black people. So these are the things that many of you already know. But before I get to my story, I often like to share, you know, let us not forget that, again, 1964, again, 1965 was not so long ago. However, what Lyndon B. Johnson did during that time, you know, I often share about the mass exodus of African Americans in the Republican Party that were a part of the Republican Party, but it was Lyndon B. Johnson who agreed to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which caused more Blacks to switch from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, because we know that his opponent, Senator Barry Goldwater, he was for segregation. And so what we found and what we saw is the Black vote, right? And so when we look at the election of 1964, and hopefully you guys can see it from my screen, and I'll point out here, just a little bit what I talked about, you know, the Black Democratic Party, as far as here, we have Democrats, and then we have Republicans, and then we see the shift right here. Democrats and Republicans. And then I often come here to the presidential election. And this goes up to 2004, where we see the shift here of the Black votes to Democrat. Whereas here, it was a little bit more narrow, but that's because of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Black women voters. So this is why I'm so passionate about voting and Black women voters. And the next slide, I'll go into my story. But in 2008 and 2012, you often heard that it was Black women who delivered the presidency of President Barack Obama. And as we see here in 2008, 95% of Black women voted for President Obama. And then here we have 93% were Blacks. But we know that Black women led that. And again, in 2012, we saw that Black women had 70.1% of the turnout, which was more than any other demographic. So we saw, again, this is a picture here from a rally, and you see Black women. But here, many of you may recall the special election that happened in 2018 with Roy Moore, and Black women delivered 98% of the vote. So for me, right? And so again, seeing Black women voting, seeing Black women just showing up, standing out, this is what caused me, one of the things that motivated me to start Black Girls Vote. So how did I get here? How did I get here being involved in movements, voter registration, being a someone an organizer? It's not something I would have thought or imagined 20 years ago I would be here, but you know, God had other plans. All right, so this guy, many of you know who this is. This is Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray, in April of 2015, the riots happened after he was in custody of Baltimore City Police, and then he expired, right? Many of us are familiar with the story. However, as people were watching the riots happen all over the country and all over the world, rather, my family members were calling me and saying, are you okay? Do you need to come to the suburbs? I live in West Baltimore, Hanlon Park, the neighborhood. And I said, no, I'm okay. But like many others, and some of you who may be here watching, and the next day I was in the community saying, what can we do? Because the day before we saw young people frustrated, tired. And you may not agree with how they responded and how they reacted, but I said, you cannot deny that they organized in a matter of minutes. So again, this is April 2015. And June of 2015, I purchased the domain name Black Girls Vote because I said, hey, 2008 and 2012, we saw what Black women did in the election. And going into 2016, why not the time now to organize and mobilize? In July 2015, same year, I had a good government job. I call it my GGJ. And I lost my political appointee when Anthony Brown lost the election. And at that moment, even though I had the domain name Black Girls Vote, I was too afraid, or I wasn't ready, as I would say, to launch it. And then in August of 2015, there was a murder that happened directly across the street from me. And being in the city of Baltimore, you know, oftentimes we have over 300 murders. It's often Black men who are being killed, but those are our brothers, those are our sons, those are our husbands, those are our father. So we see a community of Black, not only Black men hurting, but Black women who are hurting as well. And then I shared the idea of Black Girls Vote with someone in October of 2015, but it wasn't until November 30th, 2015, we launched. And we launched at Western High School, the oldest all-girl public high school in the nation. And more importantly, my mom is an alum of Western High School. And again, we launched on Shirley Chisholm's birthday. Shirley Chisholm once said, you don't make progress by standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas. And so that's how we're here. How did I get here? What's Black Girls Vote about? So our mission is to inspire Black women to use the electoral and political process to improve the quality of life for our community and our families. And we want to elevate our vision to elevate the quality of life for Black women globally. All right, so what do we do, right? When you hear about Black Girls Vote, we're doing voter registration, voter education, and voter mobilization, you know, in the community, getting folks registered to vote, but more importantly, educating them as well. All right, these are just some images. Black Girls Vote, so what's critical to us is that we focus on young women, as I mentioned before. The population is 18 to 25. So currently we have collegiate chapters at Morgan State University, American University, North Carolina A&T University, Howard University's pending. However, we have about 20 schools who have expressed interest in having Black Girls Vote chapters. What we see in 2018 2020, this election, this is a time in which young generation, millennials, Gen Z, can eclipse the baby boomers by having the highest turnout and voter turnout. However, do we know how engaged young people are? So our mission, and we're committed to engaging young Black women to be more involved in the political process. And in our engagement with them, we're talking about policy. We're talking about the implementation. When we talk about Black women and maternal health, how Black women are dying twice the amount of times of white women in labor, right? We're talking about breast cancer. Black women are more likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer than white women. So these are some of the things that we're talking about because they're committed and passionate about the issues. And it's so critical for us as a grassroots organization, what we saw in the 60s, that the movement started from the young people, whether it was the Southern Christian Leadership Council, whether it was SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinator Council, that it's critical that we hear from them because we know that they're less fearful, I would say. They're less fearful of some of us who may be in our careers and our jobs. And they, as I would say, they're with it and they're motivated to get out to vote. And honestly, they motivate me. All right, so some of our accomplishments, we're registering voters, we're training women to conduct voter registration, we're building a national brand, our Collegiate Ambassador Program, we've got national recognition from, Queen Latifah, Kamala Harris, Stacey Abrams. We currently have, this summer, we had 2 interns from Harvard, one from American University. The 2 ones from Harvard, they're still with me through the fall. So I'm working with them. One was just doing an interview with Lady Gaga's in an organization. And so for me, it's so important that we pass the torch to the next generation and see what issues are impacting them. And we created Party at the Mailbox. And so for you all who are in Baltimore, maybe familiar with the Party at the Mailbox campaign, it's where we sent out customized boxes to over 2,000 voters, right? And this is it. So if you didn't get it, we're doing it again in the general election. I'm not going to tell you what's in it, but again, everything you see here, again, in partnership, was designed by Globe Press, and we're so excited that we are expanding to Philadelphia and Detroit, in those communities where we saw in 2016 that Michigan, Black voter turnout decrease. We saw in Philadelphia the impact of Black voters in those communities. So this is our Part of the Mailbox campaign that not only started in Baltimore, but it's expanding nationally. And we are outreaching to African-American women, but all in the community. Again, and these are just some images from the campaign, Black Girls Vote. And that's pretty much my story and how I got here. And so I know that a part of it too, folks were interested in, Nyki, how did you get involved in voter registration? How did you become this advocate in the community? How did you for me, it was Congressman Cummings always said, your pain will lead you to your passion. And, seeing the things happen in my community, being of Baltimore, it led me to something which is a passion, and that's bringing people together. But more importantly, how do we bring resources back to our community? So again, Black Girls Vote, we're about getting folks out on the ground, register to vote, educate and empower them. But again, it's the policy that will change our lives. So I look forward to further discussing my work and some of the questions that you all have for me, but I know I had a limited time to speak. So thank you, Abby. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Nyki. I just have to say, I was really happy to be able to be a part of the Party at the Mailbox during the primary, and I had a great time dancing with the DJ and hearing from all the people. So I'm just so appreciative of everything that you and Black Girls Vote are doing in Baltimore and beyond. And I can't wait to discuss even more after we hear from Imani. So I'd love to turn the conversation over to our final speaker, Imani Haynes, our own MFA in Curatorial Practice alum as of this past May.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you all for having me. Hey, Micah fam. Well, yes, I'm so excited for you all to hear about the work I've been doing. So I am going to share my screen with you all and share my journey to my MFA exhibition. And so this is my work, the Million Woman March exhibition. As Abby said, I am a curatorial practice graduate, CP20. Yay, guys, we made it. So this Million Woman March happened October 25th, 1997. The footage that is playing behind the logo is actually from the march. So how it all began. If you have been in grad school, you have probably walked through those doors on your first day and thought, what am I going to do? Or you knew a semblance of what you were going to do, but you didn't quite know yet how it would play out. And that was where I was. But then I began to think about, the more transformational moments in my life. And the Million Woman March came to mind. I attended the march when I was a young girl with my mother. And I'll never forget how it felt, getting off that bus and seeing this ocean, this sea of Black women. Over 1 million Black women attended this march in 1997 in Philadelphia. And the energy that I felt, the love, the pride, the sisterhood and support was like none other. And I wanted to recreate that moment or just have people see how exciting this was. And when I would mention this to people, oftentimes others would think that I was talking about the Women's March that happened in DC, but no, I'm talking about the Million Woman March that happened in 97. The photo that you see on the right is actually a photo of the sweater that my mother bought when we attended the march. So this was a really personal moment, and this sweater kind of was the anchor that held together and also was the catalyst to, what we now know is the Million Woman March exhibition. So this is our home. This is where we live, 1606 East North Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland. We are on the grounds of the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, which plays a part in the story of the Million Woman March. The Million Woman March was founded by two grassroots organizers from Philly, Philae Chionesu and Asia Coney. And what they did to plan this thing out and get it to be so big was that they had small chapters in other cities, and Baltimore was one. And one of their meeting locations was at the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum. So this was, like I said, a full circle moment. The designs that you see, you'll see a lot of colors like coral, red, but what really stands out is the colors purple and lavender. In a lot of my research during the time of developing this in the beginning, I was reading a lot of womanist scholars and doing a lot of research on intersectionality. And there was a quote from Alice Walker that womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. And that made so much sense. Every time I would talk about womanism to others, that's what would make sense to me. And so our amazing graphic designer, Reagan King, who is a graduate of MICA as well, she took that and took a lot of my vision and created what you all see today as the branding and logo for the Million Woman March exhibition. And I also want to thank our fabricator, Dan, AKA Dan the Man, because Dan did an amazing job building the inside of this container. So so I'd like to talk more about the exhibition and the vision behind everything and all of what's inside. So the Million Woman March exhibition is about the past, present, and future of Black womanhood. And this exhibition was my thank you letter to Black women. And so, like I said, we started with the past, and the past was beginning with the Million Woman March, which was a march about intersectionality, a march about sisterhood, but also about issues that were plaguing Black women. In the 90s, we were being painted as welfare queens. We were, encroaching on the new frontier of corporate America, where we were being silenced and stifled. So the 90s was an interesting time for Black women because we were coming into ourselves, but we weren't quite there yet. So on this slide, you'll see right here is a cassette tape. Yes, children, that is how we listened to music in the 90s. We have the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill cassette tape. And that's important because Lauryn Hill recorded the album the same year as the march. And in her hit song, Do Wop That Thing, she has a line where she shouts out the Million Woman March. So she says, let it sit inside your head like A Million Women from Philly Pitt. So you guys can go back, listen to that song, and you know, Imani taught you, remember that. So our next slide will talk more about the present. So for the present, I decided to use the work of Black women artists to talk about what's going on now with Black women, how we're feeling. And these artists that I'm about to share with you all are fantastic, amazing Black women that inspired me and our visitors. So our first one is Azriana Simmons-L. She's a mixed media artist that attends MICA. She's an undergraduate at MICA. And her work really embodies the features and beauty of Black women. Featurism, which is a really big topic in debate now. You know, I think it's very important that Azriana's work, her goddesses that you see pictured here, her goddesses represent all of what Black women look like. You know, from a narrow nose bridge to a wide one, full lips to slanted eyes to chinky, to you know, high cheekbones, you know, all of the beauty that, you know, we know or come to know as Black women is embodied in Azriana's work. So that's why she was an amazing addition to MWM. Our next artist, Latoya Hobbs, the Sondheim winner. Woo-hoo! She is also MICA faculty. So these large woodcut ink prints are, of course, striking. But what Latoya work does in this space is that her work speaks to the humanity of Black women. You are forced to look at these large images of our face, our hair, our expressions, which is so beautiful. But I love that Latoya work preaches the opposite of what Black women have often been told. Black women are told to shrink themselves to make others feel comfortable. But Latoya work is large, it takes up space, it commands your attention, and that is what her work speaks to me as well as other audience members. But what I also love is that Latoya work, like I said, not only speaks to the humanity, but think of the emotions that are on these women's faces. So I encourage you all to check out Latoya's work, as well as Azriana, and our next artist and last artist, Caitlin Brown, whose work, who is a MICA alum as well. She graduated from the PIM program, Photo and Electronic Media program. And Caitlin, after a studio visit, we decided that she would make this commission piece. These 4 pieces are called Monolithic Propaganda. And Caitlin work addresses the propaganda, the heavy policing of Black women, whether it's the policing of our hair, which you see in the No Trespassing piece, or the policing of our bodies that you see in the award piece, the policing of our words that you see in The Bluest Eye, and or the policing of our activism, which is very central to the conversation that we're having today. So, like I said, the past, present, and future was a theme that was really heavy in the exhibition. And so for the future, like Nykidra, I collaborated with Western High School. And if you know a Western High School graduate, you know they are proud Western women. And so I had the honor of working with these young women for 5 months with their teacher, Miss Chanel Middleton, in their African American history class. Every Monday, had to wake up very early to work with these 11th and 12th grade young women. And in this time, we talked about the Million Woman March, of course. We talked about womanism, but more importantly, we talked about how they saw themselves as young Black women and the future generation of Black women. And once we had, hashed that conversation out and talked about how they saw themselves, we all landed on the idea of doing protest flags. And as you can see, their work came out beautifully. And some of our pre-programming was elders and community members that came together and put put these young women's flags, essentially their dreams, visions, and goals together. And another mission of the Million Woman March exhibition was to create an intergenerational conversation. So that's why we have the past, present, and future all together in this space. So I want to address our village, the people who supported us. If you all aren't familiar with when MWM was supposed to open, we were slated to open March 20th, and the state of Maryland closed down March 13th. COVID had other plans for MWM, but we still made it through. July 31st was when we opened, and we opened for 8 days. And over the course of 8 days, we saw 123 visitors. This space, although it was, already originally going to be in the container, it worked out, and it was COVID friendly. And I was blessed enough to bring culture and art to the community during a time that's been really hard for a lot of us. And like I said, I wanted to thank everyone who came out, but I also wanted to thank those who supported us when it was just an idea, when it was just a SketchUp drawing. So the Y.L. Hoy Memorial Award was an amazing help. The Ashi Fund, which is a collective that helps to fund projects of Black women creatives, as well as the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum and our GoFundMe crew. So, our village was so important in making this happen. And I'm so blessed to have such a supportive ecosystem. So if you all are interested to get to know us even more, MWM exhibit has now changed and morphed into the Black Women's Museum. And we are currently renting this container, but we are on our way to buying this container. We have a GoFundMe, and you can check that out on our website, blackwomensmuseum.org, to contribute. And you can also, if you want a piece of the Million Woman March exhibition, we also have t-shirts that I'm wearing. So you have the MWM logo on the front and in the back. So please follow us on all of our social media platforms. Support us and support Black women, because this space will be a space where we are going to provide a platform for our stories, as well as our lived experiences. So thank you all for hanging on in there with us, and I'm ready to get into these questions. So Abby, you can take it away.
Thanks so much, Imani. It was really inspirational seeing you pivot during the COVID-19. I know all of us have been kind of living in this new reality, but to think about doing an entire exhibition and then having to do all this socially distanced time, it was just really inspiring to see how you worked through that. So thank you, and thank you for sharing your work with us today. So I want to remind the audience that we do have a Q&A open for everyone. So if you have a question to ask any of the panelists, there's the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom webinar that you can ask a question of all the panelists or anyone in particular. But I'd like to think about going back to Professor Bonner's work in the Remaking the Republic book. And as we know, today is the 233rd year anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. But we know from the beginning it was an imperfect and in many ways hypocritical document that established a deeply flawed nation. So how do we reconcile, even today, the United States' evolving definition and weaponization of citizenship with accessing the right to vote and our upcoming election in 2 months?
Wow, so that's pretty big, right? I guess one of the things that I think is really fascinating about citizenship, at least the way that I've understood it, is that it's always been a kind of tool for African Americans. And I think that folks have understood that it's not a perfect tool. They've understood that as much as it's a tool that might enable them to be included and to secure something like the right to vote, it's also, by its very nature, a tool that can lead to inclusion is a tool that can produce exclusion. And so there's always been a recognition of the fact that certain people are left out of the status of citizen, and that can facilitate imperialism at home and abroad. I think that, with that said, and I think one of the things that I've been thinking about as I was thinking about the vote in particular today is that my sense is that Black folks have understood that it's one of many tools. It's one of the things that they might want to rely upon. It's one way that they might seek out what they view as justice or freedom or liberation. But it can't be the only thing that we rely upon, because fundamentally thinking about what Nyki said about Black women and their exclusion from the 15th Amendment, right? There is this reality that the laws as they've been crafted, whether it's the 14th Amendment, which confers citizenship on Black people, or the 15th Amendment, which confers the right to vote on Black men, the laws that they've been crafted have left people out, and they've been designed as such. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that. And I also think that the people that I'm writing about recognize that, and they saw so many of these things as imperfect but useful in the particular moment that they were being deployed.
So what do you think Willis Hodges would think of where we are today in 2020?
He'd be like, what are y'all talking on? What is that thing? I think that I can't imagine that he wouldn't feel satisfied and pleased with the progress that's been made. And in my teaching, I often like to try to, build connections that show the ways that some of the problems and the injustices of the past have persisted to the present. But I always try to balance that with a recognition of how much has changed. So in 1880, as the federal government retreated from Reconstruction, retreated from the policy of trying to make racial justice a real thing, Frederick Douglass said that things were bleak, but the fact that the Constitution had changed, the fact that the law said that that Black people should not be enslaved, and that Black men were citizens and had the right to vote, that was a new benchmark, and that the nation had to march up to that point. And so it wasn't there yet, but it had to get there. And so Willis Hodges is not seeing that. He's not experiencing that moment. But Douglass, as somebody who lived across the periods of slavery into freedom and Black citizenship, Douglass recognized how transformative it was. And so, even in 1880, things would have felt remarkably free to Willis Hodges in a way that they didn't in the 1830s and 40s.
Thank you. And so I'm also thinking about, as we honor the Constitution's anniversary today, it's also the 100th anniversary of the signing of the 19th Amendment this year. So, when we think about women's suffrage and kind of the lack of talking about Black women and the role of activism throughout all of these movements, I'd love to hear from Nyki and Imani and even Dr. Bonner about how we understand the role of Black women's activism and political participation. So Nyki, would you like to maybe start?
Absolutely, I'll start. And, I touched on it a little earlier today, that it's so critical as we talk about our history. We make sure we dig a little deeper and look at the untold stories of Black women, because we know that Black women were there. They fought just like everyone else for the right to vote. And those women like Mary McLeod Bethune, who you don't often hear about, you do hear about, she started school in Florida, but, in 1920, she was intimidated by the Ku Klux Klan, by them coming to her school to intimidate them from just registering to vote, right? And so there were so many things, so much opposition put in place for Black women to get the right to vote. And so it wasn't until, as we saw in 1965, that we actually got our right to vote. And so I think with the women's suffrage, oftentimes we talk about how Black women sometimes feel that there's and some would say the double negative, right? Being Black and being a woman, and how we're forgotten, sometimes within our own community. We're like, stand up, someone stand up and stand, and say something, fight for us, because constantly we find ourselves fighting battles and continuously fighting battles. So again, we want to make sure that we continue to say their names as we talk about, the campaign now, say her name, make sure we say her name, continue to say the names of those women and uplift those women, empowering as they are resting, so that folks know that they were a part of the story, because our stories aren't told in the way that we would like them to be told. And so it's the Imanis of the world who has, the Black Women's Museum, and she's empowering another generation and creating a space, because what we're finding is that a lot of people don't necessarily know as we would say, the story in its entirety. So it's my job and the job of others to continue to do the work, but then also make sure that we know that we stand on the shoulders of those Black women.
I can also follow that up. Thank you, Nykidra. So to me, like, this question was very interesting, because the idea of acknowledging the suffrage movement as a celebration for all women is a farce, because essentially we are celebrating white women's right to vote. The 100-year celebration continues to center white women's triumph, while making it seem like the Black pain that they caused was an unfortunate byproduct on their path for the greater good. What we need to understand is that, like Nykidra said, Black women have always been activists. Although the language may have changed and it's different throughout the years, we have always been the author of our own stories. We've never asked for permission because we knew we would never be given that space. Black women have fought for the liberation of Black women. Black women have fought for the liberation of Black people, and we have fought for the liberation of all people. And it's important that if we're going to talk about American movements and stories, then we need to create the space for Black women's stories to be told and to be heard and given a platform. And like Nykidra said, that's why I have the Black Women's Museum. That's why Nykidra is doing her work with Black Girls Vote. That's why Chris is writing his book about, emancipation and Blackness and voting. These are very important stories that need to be told on a larger platform. So that's my answer to the question. I don't want to get preachy, though.
Yeah, and I just want to add something else really quickly. Nyki here, is that, thank you so much, Imani. She's absolutely right. But that's why voting is so critical to Black women in our community, because we have to, take a stand. We're tired. And when I say that, we have to demand policy in exchange for our vote. And so even now, in light of 2020, this election, for those who may have seen, and, pop culture, you had different people such as Black women who wrote a letter to the Washington Post demanding that Joe Biden selected an African-American woman on the ticket. People were upset with that. And I said, why, right? And again, we're a nonpartisan organization. They demanded that just because Kamala is a vice presidential candidate doesn't mean we don't want a Supreme Court justice as well, right? In the event that you get elected. But it's those conversations that you have to have and demand the policies. Because again, when things happen, oftentimes our community is forgotten. So with Black Girls Vote, my goal and my passion is to form a voting bloc. And the voting bloc, honestly, is to make sure that we're able to swing elections, but more importantly, we're able to swing policy our way. Because we see time and time again that there's a disconnect, and Black people, Black women are often forgotten. But when we look at the elections that are happening in our country, it's always Black women. That's why I had to quote, Black women save the country again. Black women always coming to the rescue, but who's there to rescue us? And the only way we're going to be able to do it is through policy. As I look at the city of Baltimore, it's a $3.2 billion business. How are Black women getting some of those government contracts? How are Black women being able to support their families? And again, everyone depends on us, but who can we depend on? So for me, it's so critical that we mobilize and we organize our votes, but we demand resources back to our community, because that's how we build wealth that was taken away from us and we don't have access to. When we talk about redlining in our community, I was just talking about that recently, that people are able to build generational wealth where we didn't even have access to that. We didn't have an option to that. And so what we find is starting over and over and over again, but people build wealth off the government, off of government resources. But if we're putting you in office as Black women, what are you doing in exchange for us? And we want policy in exchange for our vote. What does that look like?
I would, I'm just thinking about what Imani said about Black women always having been there. One of the favorite stories that I tell in the book is about a crowd of Black New Yorkers who rescue a fugitive slave in the 1830s. And there's this, massive crowd of people. And at the front of the crowd, there is a woman, a Black woman, and the newspaper says she reaches under her dress and pulls out a knife and gives it to the fugitive slave and tells him to run away. And so this is a time when most of the Black men that I write about didn't want Black women to be involved in politics. They didn't want them to be out on the streets. They didn't want them to be speaking out and saying anything really. And that's one of the things that I wrestle with in my book is like, what does it mean to write about these Black men who are so exclusionary? But I sort of feel okay about it when I can tell a story like that and talk about this woman who made the choice to make her voice heard and say, like, this is enough. This man needs to be free. I'm going to do what I can to help him, regardless of whether other Black men or, of course, white men who are interested in upholding the slaveholding system, regardless of what they say, this is what I'm going to do. And so she took the opportunity and acted and made her voice heard. So, yes, Black women have always been there, even when Black men aren't trying to uplift their voices.
So I'm kind of curious too, like, now that Kamala Harris is on the ticket, like, is this a monumental shift? Like, where do we kind of go from here? Like, how do we honor this moment, but also keep fighting for even more representation and more uplifting of the centrality of Black women's voices in all of the change making that's happened throughout our country's history?
Should I take that? I don't want to dominate this. I would say that I would just maybe echo one of the things Nyki said, which is how important it is for like continued conversation, continued engagement, right? Like Black folks need to and should be able to feel like they will be heard after November 3rd.
No matter who gets into office, right? Because we don't know what November the 4th will look like. Well, we won't even have the results of the election November 4th, right? And so,
true, yeah.
And understanding that this is a different time. We are accustomed to doing things one way, and then from November the 3rd until when the results are announced, anything can happen. And so we have to honor this moment that we are experiencing. And this is the first time that a non-Ivy League person has been a vice president or presidential candidate, and honor Kamala by looking at her research and learn more about HBCUs, right? And how critical they were to the African-American community and how they still are critical to the African-American community. And so many people are given opportunities by going to HBCUs. I myself didn't go to HBCU, but I wish I had but those are the things that learning about her, you get to learn more about our community and our culture. So this is an exciting time, I would say, for many. However, we don't know. Anything can happen.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of my panelists. As an HBCU grad, Savannah State University proud, I too see that, like, that joy of how HBCU graduates are. We feel like we're finally being seen, we're being taken serious. So for me, that's what Kamala Harris does for me, is that she's finally representing an institution that has produced greatness for so long, and now we're finally getting a large platform.
It's definitely an exciting moment. And I think it really is on me and my fellow white women and white people in general to really also dig into history and understand, like, this is, something that, unfortunately, we're not taught Black history in a way that we should in this country. And, but also just our history, because it's collective history.
Abby, one quick thing, I'm sorry. When we look back at 2016, when you said that as white women, I think it was Joy Ann Reid, we were having a conversation and said, in 2008, 2008, that was our moment for Black people, President Barack Obama, that was our moment, like, yes, we did it, we have a Black president. And in 2016, thinking that would be the moment for women, right? Like, women, we have a woman president. But we saw that white women had a different story, right? And so when we look at voter turnout, historically, 94% of Black women voted for Secretary Clinton at the time. And then, of course, with white women, over 50%. And it wasn't, white women continuously vote for the Republican candidate. And so I think that when we talk about our history and talk about, let's unify as women to vote, but we have different stories when it comes to the voting booths. And that's often not highlighted enough, because it's almost like we got to get the women out to vote. Let's get out the women to vote. However, Black women, white women are voting totally differently. So I say to anybody, it's a little frustrating being on the ground, not seeing more resources being poured into Black organizations that are on the ground, that are bringing out their communities to vote, but more so, let's get all women out to vote. But no, that's not, in my humble opinion, where resources need to be directed, because we see what's going on. So I want to uplift those organizations who are on the ground. Like Imani said, there were 2 grassroots organizations in Philadelphia that started the Women's March. It's Black women who are showing up and who are creating movements and changing the trajectory of people's lives. However, not getting the recognition, not getting the resources or the funding to continue to do their work. And so as people are asking, what can I do? How can I support the movement? Support Black-led organizations, often grassroots organizations that are not getting the money. As Imani said, she has a GoFundMe up now to get her trailer. However, let's look at arts in our community and those resources that the government gives us, and we need to demand those resources as Black women, because we're the ones putting people in office. So moving forward, as Black women who are listening, I think that's our focus, to demand those resources for the people in our community.
Absolutely. And I would just say that, as me and my fellow white people, we can also do our work of really thinking about, in the nonprofit industrial complex, like who has access to funding, who has access to the philanthropic world. And it all kind of compounds over and over in this history of like, we're not actually getting funding to the grassroots organizations that are actually doing the work and making the impacts that we know are actually moving the needle, especially in cities like Baltimore.
Yeah, social capital is real and it exists. Absolutely.
So as we're thinking about Baltimore, but even just beyond, like Nyki, as we think about this election cycle, there's always barriers to voter access, but especially in this time of COVID-19, what can we do to support our neighbors, our friends, in making sure they're accessing the vote and getting out there and doing their part?
I would say first and foremost, come up with a plan. This time last year, none of us would have thought we would be living in a global pandemic, as we would say 2 pandemics. So make sure that you have a plan for voting. I say early voting is emergency preparedness. Get out to vote. Make sure that, 1, your voter registration is active, and I'm sure a majority of folks are active. And that's if you voted in the last 2 federal elections. If not, there's a possibility that you could have gotten purged off the roll. So make sure that your voter status is active, but also come up with a plan. In Maryland, early voting begins on October 26th and it ends November 2nd. And if you choose to vote in person, we ask that you protect yourselves because, COVID has not ended, and that you're there, you're social distancing, you have your mask. But what we saw in the primary election, vote by mail works. Was extremely confusing for many folks to get their application in the mail, because some folks think it's their ballot. And so make sure that we're having the conversation with our family members in our community. And no, in order for you to get that ballot, you have to return that. And so I think that's a way that has caused a lot of confusion. And confusion, in my opinion, is voter suppression. When we look at what's happening in the United States Postal Service, where they are cutting the hours of our postal workers. My mom is a postal worker in Baltimore City, and she's like, well, me and my friends will stay behind. You don't have to pay us overtime, right? Because we want to make sure that Marylanders are getting their ballots, but things like that. And creating long lines is voter suppression, right? And so that's why we need to make sure that we vote early. We have a plan. You get there when you can, because on election day, if you see a long line, it's much more likely that you will get out of line. So again, make sure your status is active. If not, get registered to vote, register someone else to vote, but then also come up with a plan and vote early and be safe.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I've been just, obviously at MICA, we're trying to do our part, but, I think all of us, we need to think about our neighbors, think about, if someone needs to like print off a ballot, you know, if there's not a printer or internet access, like what can you do? And so even make a plan for like, you know, neighbor voting buddies and really help everyone out to make sure that they're doing this safely. So one of our audience questions is for Dr. Bonner. You mentioned that you are sympathetic to African Americans who doubt their vote counts. What do you think is most powerful method, message, or platform for mobilizing African American voters?
Yeah, so I considered whether I wanted to put that part in or not. I don't want this to come across like, oh, Chris Bonner went on Zoom and said Black folks don't need to vote, because I don't believe that. But I think that I guess I feel like generally my feeling is that it's better to try to understand than to just come in with the criticism. So yeah, I do think it's real. I think there are real and legitimate reasons why Black folks feel skeptical about the formal political process. I guess I would think, you know, maybe to echo what some of what we said already, giving African Americans a feeling that their voices and concerns will continue to be heard is really important. And so I think a lot of that comes from, and it's interesting. I mean, I read some interesting things in the primary stages about the appeal of Joe Biden and the appeal of like the traditional Democratic Party in places like South Carolina with large Black populations. And I think one of the things that's fascinating is this the reality that for much of the 20th century, so many Black folks have felt like the only place they can turn to have their concerns heard is like to a local Democratic official. And so that has sort of cultivated this kind of trust that may not have always been fully repaid at the national level. But I think building that kind of trust, that feeling that like I can say something or ask for something or demand something, and the people in positions of power will work toward realizing those demands, toward satisfying what I need, toward, you know, the justice that folks are calling for. I think building that kind of relationship is key. I think on a more immediate level, maybe one thing to think about is, and again, I think this is echoing Nyki's point, is like policy. Like folks who are candidates for office need to listen to what Black people want and say that they are going to move toward enacting those things. And so part of it is like the human side, but part of it I think needs to be like the concrete, you know, like the brass tacks of politics is like, what have you done for me lately? So what is it?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because not only do we talk about the policy, but let's talk about the numbers and the time period and those benchmarks, because people are going to say, I'm going to improve XYZ, I'm going to put more resources to HBCUs, but you know, how much and in what time period? Not the first term. I mean, not the second term, but the first term, right? Because it's almost, we'll get to that later. We have other things, you know, I was hoping to get to it, but no, elect me again, right? And so those are the things that we have to have those tough conversations early on and start talking about what does the policy look like, and then time periods and holding folks accountable, because as Professor Barner said, some folks have lost trust in the system, right? And they don't see, you know, why am I going to vote? It's so crazy, because I was looking at an episode on CNN recently, and it was a Black woman in Pennsylvania, and it almost woke me up out of my sleep. And she said, I've been voting for Democrats for years, right? And I don't like Donald Trump either. I don't feel like I am going to vote. But she said, but there was a guy who was, I want to say her Lyft driver, I believe. And he was like, he was from Turkey. And he said, you know, you don't understand. It was so, it's such an honor to be here in the United States of America. So he said, you must vote. To have the right to vote is so critical. And she said, that man from Turkey made her decide to vote. And I said, if you have Black women in the middle of Pennsylvania who are tired and saying they're not going to vote, oh, that's a problem. That is a huge problem for any candidate, particularly the Democratic Party, because she's tired. You know, people are frustrated if they aren't seeing, you know, she had a pre-existing condition and healthcare. They aren't seeing healthcare. They aren't seeing the benefits. They're seeing things taken away from them. They are unmotivated. And for us, you know, Black people say, if you don't vote for, you know, you're going to die. Black people say, we are survivors. We're going to survive. That's what we're built on. We're built on surviving. So it's time that, again, that not only we talk about those policies that, you know, it sounds good, but we need to make sure that we're holding folks accountable and they have a Black agenda that they're going to implement.
Thank you. I would be remiss, obviously, from the Maryland Institute College of Art perspective, to not bring up the role of arts and artists in creating an engaged citizenry. So I'd just love to hear your opinions about, like, you know, what can artists do, or even what is the importance or role of artists in making sure that everyone is engaged?
So I guess since I went to art school, I'll answer that. But what I'll say for Black people specifically, art has been a form of resistance. It's been a form of hope, power, freedom. And like the artists are the ones who make the change. The ones who are always thinking of ways to engage us, the viewers, and and make sure that we engage with the world around us, while encouraging encouraging us to connect with our humanity. So the arts, of course, is very important. Unfortunately, it isn't funded as if it's very important. But yeah, it's paramount. It's extremely important. I can't stress it enough. You know, art gave me the access to, you know, I mean, my first interaction with art is the reason why I'm here today. You know, is the reason why I am proud of who I am. As you can see, you know, I have Black art all throughout my house, and that is what I saw growing up in my home. That is what I saw when I, you know, would attend museums with my mother, or when I would go to speaking engagements with my father. Those moments are so pivotal for me, and for many of us, Black or non-Black. Art is that moment that you are able to see yourself in an imaginative state. Art allows you to escape. So I feel like, you know, the fact that art allows you to engage and allows you to see yourself is how it creates citizenry.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, we're all creatives, you know, in some way, shape, or form or fashion. But art moves you. Art moves you in a way that oftentimes you can't be moved. How many times have you seen a picture or a painting or a statue that you have to stop and pause, and, you know, I wonder what the artist was thinking here, or what was their thought process, or how I moved by this, you know, not knowing what was the motivation behind it. But when you think about voting in elections, you also have to be moved as well. People need to feel compelled. They need to feel moved to vote. And it has to be something that draws you in. And that's what art does. Art draws you in. I'm looking at Imani's poster in the background. I keep going to it, like, you know, it's so beautiful. And I'm sitting here like, that's power. You know, as a Black woman, that pink poster, my favorite color, with the bamboo earrings, natural hair, is like, that right there is empowering me. Like, and what I'm receiving is, you got this, sis, go sis, right? And so just looking, by us being here in this space and seeing that, I'm being moved and motivated by art. And again, and working with our creators, right? Because there are so many people in this space who want to be involved in engagement. As I mentioned, our whole Party at the Mailbox campaign, you know, the shirt that I have on now, it was me having an idea saying, hey, you know, let's work with the Globe School. This is some things I want to implement, and being able to get that out and creating a movement in the city of Baltimore. No one has seen the things that we did with our Party at the Mailbox campaign. Not only did we have over 2,000 boxes distributed, we did an evaluation on it. And the evaluation showed that people who got the boxes versus those who didn't voted at a higher rate. And so that's, we're being able to move people not only to dance at our virtual party, but moving them to vote. And so arts play a huge and critical role in, you know, civic engagement.
We did get a question from the Q&A do you believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the difference in how Black voices will be heard and why?
I would say, I think before folks get too excited and thinking that November 4th, that they're going to be elected, I'm not as confident, right? And so, and to be honest, so I think that before folks say, you know, with a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration, they're going to make the change. First, you have to make sure folks are getting out to vote so that they are in position to do that. You know, with things that are happening with foreign interference and misinformation, disinformation on the internet, there are a lot of things. And, you know, we're in COVID. You're not seeing the rallies. You're not seeing what's happening as we saw previously. So we don't know what's going to happen with this election. And as I mentioned before, even though the election ends on November 3rd, we may not find out the results until 2 weeks later. What's the plan? Who's watching the ballots, right? So all those things that we're not talking about, but we're talking about the Biden-Harris administration, what it will look like and who the cabinet will be. Yeah, I think we need to take a step back and look at, you know, less than 50 days away from the election, if that is your candidate. Black Girls Vote, we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse anyone. But I think that during these last 40 plus days on the campaign trail, or if you are supporting them or you're supporting the Trump administration, whatever that may be, make sure that Black people and Black issues are something on the forefront and that you're talking about if you're looking to sway any voters, as I would say. But if they are to get into office, I do think that they will have enormous change on the policies and some of the resources that are coming to the Black community.
I would say I'm trying to be optimistic, both in terms of like election result, and I would try to be optimistic. I am trying to be optimistic about, you know, what might happen if Democratic candidates are elected. What I'm thinking about really is I think it's been as horrific as it's been to watch Black folks killed in the news so often in the past 5 or 6 months. It's been somewhat encouraging to see what that news and what that awareness has been doing and what effects it might be having. Like I do feel like this is a, you know, not a different moment than any that we've seen before, but a moment that seems to be operating right now in which Black folks are getting heard. People have been trying to be heard for so long, and this, for whatever reason, seems to be a time when more people, not only Black people, are aware of and concerned about the things that Black people are demanding. And so I would hope that, again, like I would hope that would continue after the date when candidates need the votes.
Imani, I see you nodding there. Do you want to unmute and say something?
Yeah, no, I mean, Chris, you said it perfectly. Yeah, I'm curious to see after. What happens after. I won't say I'm a skeptic, but to be honest, I don't know. It's kind of it's hard for me to imagine what it'll be like if either party wins. Because this year, if anything, has taught me, I mean, man, throw you for a loop is like an understatement. So I'm curious to see how people will take justice and freedom into their own hands, and liberation into their own hands, and activism into their own hands. Like, I feel like people are going to do this, you know, to really try and like work and do this on their own and for themselves, and not just rely on our politicians like we've done for so long.
Yeah, I would just maybe to build on that a little bit. One of the things I was saying, I think in my prepared remarks, was that voting has to be like one tool in a broader kit. I think that, seeing Black people out in the streets protesting and insisting on their rights has been really powerful. Seeing Black people organizing through social media for the past several years has been really inspiring. Seeing, the emergence of, or the reemergence in some ways of like mutual aid as a Black political cause has been really inspiring and encouraging, right? I think that, the vote can't be the only thing. The vote can't be everything, but it's a lot, and it needs to be a lot.
Yeah, and I would just say 1,000%, right? And so, as I say, it's not just about the vote. I often say it's election and economics, and making sure that we are building that wealth racial gap that's real, and looking at the divide. And so we need to have those conversations about those boardrooms. As CEOs, there are no Black women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. We did at one point have Ursula Burns at Xerox, but she's no longer in position. And so how do we empower Black people? You have to empower them economically, and we have to have those conversations. Voting is one thing, but you vote on election day, but you don't see the change in your household. How am I wealthier? What's coming back to me? How am I reaping the benefit from that? And so I agree, voting is just one tool, but there's more to just voting, and holding folks, not necessarily holding folks accountable, but being your own activist, because we say, I don't see anything that has changed in my community. So tell me what you did. How did you activate? Did you call your legislator? Did you write a letter? Did you go to a meeting? And people, I didn't do that, right? And so those are the things that you do, you have to activate in addition to voting. But also, as we said, it's a tool that can, again, help bring some more resources back so it can improve your life and the life of your community and your family. Because people need to see it impacted their families before you can go and try to save everyone else.
And I'm just gonna do a quick shout out for our US Census. We have the deadline has been moved up to September 30th. So as a way to also add to voting, and also making sure that Baltimore and the places that you live are getting the funding that they deserve based on the people that are living there. Please fill out your census by September 30th. We're working with the Baltimore Office of Promotion and Arts to make sure that we are reminding people to do that within the next couple of weeks. So just needed to jump in there with my little ad. And also someone from the audience asked if we could define HBCUs. So historically Black colleges and universities. I didn't know if you all wanted to say anything else additional to that, but just in case anyone didn't know what the acronym stood for.
No, I think whoever asked, thank you for asking, right? And so there's a rich culture in the African American community at HBCUs. It's so natural that comes to us. So thank you for asking, and hopefully you'll go and do some research and learn about some of the great state of come from HBCUs, because we weren't always given access to some of those white institutions, so we built our own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but like Nykidra said, it's a long legacy and history that comes from HBCUs. I describe my experience at attending an HBCU as think of being around like all of your favorite people all the time. That's my experience when, while I was attending Savannah State University. And also as a Black person attending an HBCU, because we have students from all over the world that come. It's not just in a Black only club, like some people think. But attending an HBCU was beneficial to me because it was the only place that I felt that I could be prepared as a Black professional. Most of my professors were Black, and they were also in my field. So they could tell me, of course, how to navigate as professional and, make sure you're qualified this way and make sure you have these tools. But they also were able to tell me the barriers that I was going to come up against. as a Black woman in the field. And, you know, that was very beneficial to me in my development. So I am forever grateful for my HBCU education. And I tell everyone, my parents made me, Savannah State raised me. And I bleed blue and orange. And like I said, the sense of pride and love that we all have for our institution is undying. So HBCUs are amazing. I love you, Micah. But yes, I love my SSU. So
yeah, I would say quickly. So I went to Howard University and which was established in 1867, and I was going to say that a lot of the HBCUs were actually established in that moment after emancipation, after the Civil War, when the federal government was looking out for Black people and their concerns. And you know, Howard was the center of the legal project of, in a lot of ways, the legal project of school desegregation in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. That was centered at Howard Law School. And so, I think it's remarkable to see that as an example of what can come out of a moment when a government is actually caring about the concerns of vulnerable people in need, like formerly enslaved people in the aftermath of the Civil War. And so I hope we can be in a moment like that soon and get some more wonderful things like Howard.
Thank you. I know we're really proud to have Morgan and Coppin in Baltimore. So it's I think I also take for granted, like, everyone knows what HBCU is, but thank you for sharing that. That was good to hear your personal reflections. I know we're just about out of time, so I wanted to make sure we had enough time for each of you to just do final thoughts or direct people to how they can further support your efforts and just kind of help us wrap up our great discussion tonight.
All right, you can find us, www.blackgirlsvote.com, on all social media handles. That's where we are. And, people ask how they can donate, but if you think you want to donate to Black Girls Vote, I say don't donate to Black Girls Vote tonight. Donate to Imani and her project. And she said she's trying to buy a trailer. So anything that, if anyone was thinking about donating, I ask that you just support her, because it's so critical that us as Black women, we support each other in this time and in this moment. And so again, Black Girls Vote, you can find us. And thank you, Micah, for having me here tonight.
Christopher?
So, I mean, yeah, I've been really glad to have here. I had to be here. I'm just thinking about like what I would want to promote. So my book is out. It's called Remaking the Republic. Check it out. It's it's an academic book, but I think there's some interesting stories in it. Oh, thank you. I should have a copy nearby. There's a copy over my shoulder there. I used to write at this blog. Oh yeah, I'm also published in this New Perspectives collection, which should be over my right shoulder here. I used to write for this blog called Black Perspectives, and there's still, I don't write there regularly anymore, but there's still some of the best work that I've seen being produced on Black history and Black culture and Black thought, and it's at a website that's aaihs.org. So check that out, and every day, learn something and see what folks are thinking and writing about.
Awesome.
You may have to put that website in the chat. You said it pretty fast.
I will.
Okay, awesome.
As for me, thank you, Nykidra, so much. We definitely have to talk offline. But yes, if you all are interested in supporting, please check us out on Instagram at Black Women's Museum. You can also go on our website, which has our donation for GoFundMe, a link to our mailing list, because that's really important, as well as if you would like to purchase a Million Women's March exhibition t-shirt. Once again, they are selling fast, so get them while they're hot. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We are new in the Twitter world, so please follow us, guys. And it is BLKWMNS Museum. So we took the vowels out of the Black and woman's part. So yes, just follow us on Twitter as well, or you can type in the search bar on Twitter, Black Women's Museum, and we will pop up. So please continue to support Black women, Black people, and thank you so much, Micah, for an amazing 2 years. I met some of the most interesting people that I know I will have in my life for the rest of my life. So thank you, Micah, for the experience and for, you know, believing in MWM and believing in me as well. And thank you, CP. I have to shout out my program. So shout out to Curatorial Practice, and thank you all for having us.
Well, I'm going to hold you 1 second because I have 2 quick announcements, and then we can move forward to thanking you all as well as we can. National Voter Registration Day is next Tuesday. And so you can sign up to our TurboVote platform at mica.turbovote.org, and also visit our website at mica.edu/vote. We will be putting all of our information on voting and state-by-state guides, etc., as well as staff, faculty, and student resources. And then we also have our Globe Collection and Press, which Nyki promoted for us. But if you want to know more about our historic press, which was in Baltimore for many, many years before Micah was able to hold on to that before it closed, and we are doing a huge voting initiative through them and still working with Black Girls Vote, which we're really excited about that. And then Devin Allen's most recent time cover photo is in the center, where if you look really closely, you can see some Globe posters that were distributed for that march. So check them out. They have, it's at Globe at Micah, and you can visit their store and get all of your Globe resources. We will also make sure that any of our voting posters are available for free download. So make sure you check out our website so that way we can get those spread out wherever you want to use them. So I just want to give a warm thank you from Micah to our 3 presenters, Christopher Bonner, Nyki Robinson, and Imani Haynes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was wonderful to be able to join you and be your host. And this will be recorded and available on mica.edu if you want to share it with any of your friends, or make sure that anyone else gets access to it afterward. But thank you to the audience for joining us tonight, and thank you all for being a part of this wonderful conversation.
And thank you for being an amazing host, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Shout out to Abby.
All right. Well, and thank you so much to the Enoch Pratt Free Library for being our co-host for the night and making this all possible. The Enoch Pratt Free Library is an amazing resource that's doing great things during COVID, including mobile hotspots and getting printed materials out to people and all kinds of things to just make sure there's still access to the library. So thank you, Tracy, and the Enoch Pratt Free Library. And again, thank you to our panelists. And yeah, let's make sure we vote and fill out your census and keep being active and doing what we can. Thank you all.